The Crystal Palace restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of Boston's elite, the golden chandeliers casting a warm glow over white tablecloths and crystal glasses. It was the kind of establishment where business deals were sealed with handshakes worth millions, and where the city's most dangerous men came to enjoy fine dining without fear of being disturbed. Frank Gallagher's entrance silenced the room immediately, his imposing figure commanding attention as he strode through the door, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. His reputation preceded him, head of the city's most feared crime family, a man who had built his empire on broken promises and shattered kneecaps. The maitre d' nervously guided Frank and his associates to their usual corner table, the one with the best view of both the entrance and the kitchen doors. No one dared to look directly at them, eyes carefully averted as conversation slowly resumed, now noticeably quieter than before. Samantha Clark had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, trying to save enough for her grandmother's medical bills. Her feet ached as she approached the feared mobster's table, notepad clutched perhaps too tightly in her trembling hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I take your drink orders?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Frank barely looked up, his attention fixed on the conversation with his associates about territory disputes on the north side. When she returned with their drinks, Frank's hand accidentally knocked against his whiskey glass, sending the amber liquid splashing across his tailored suit. The restaurant fell silent as his face contorted with rage, eyes narrowing as he turned his fury toward the waitress. "You stupid girl," he snarled, rising slightly from his seat as everyone watched in horror. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? More than you'll make in a year. I could buy and sell this entire restaurant just to fire you." Samantha stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribcage as she faced the man who could end her career, or worse, with a single phone call. Every survival instinct screamed at her to apologize, to grovel, to disappear. Instead, she straightened her spine, met his gaze directly, and spoke 4 words that made every table go silent. "Not yours to spill." The simple statement hung in the air like a physical presence, the defiance in her voice unmistakable. Frank's associates tensed, hands instinctively moving toward concealed weapons, as they waited for the explosion of rage that would surely follow. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waitstaff frozen in place, diners suspended in mid-bite. To everyone's shock, Frank Gallagher's face transformed, the rage melting into something entirely unexpected: respect. He tilted his head slightly, studying Samantha with newfound interest, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. "Bring me another drink," he finally said, his voice surprisingly soft as he settled back into his chair. "And your name." "I want to know who has the courage to speak to me that way." Samantha maintained her composure as she returned with a fresh whiskey, placing it carefully before him. "My name is Samantha," she replied, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Frank raised his glass in a small salute, eyes never leaving her face. "I've broken men twice your size for showing me half that much disrespect," he said, the implied threat lingering beneath his words. "Yet here you stand. Interesting." The tension in the restaurant slowly dissipated as conversations cautiously resumed, but something had fundamentally changed. An invisible connection had formed between the fearsome mafia boss and the brave waitress, a moment of genuine recognition that would alter both their destinies. 3 days later, Samantha was wiping down tables after closing when she heard a knock at the locked restaurant door. Her blood ran cold when she saw Frank Gallagher standing outside, alone this time, his expression unreadable in the dim streetlight. Against her better judgment, Samantha approached the door, unlocking it with trembling fingers. "We're closed," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice despite her racing heart. Frank stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking almost ordinary without his usual entourage. "I'm not here for dinner," he replied, his voice softer than she remembered. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior the other night." The apology caught Samantha completely off guard, the feared mobster suddenly appearing almost human as he stood awkwardly in the doorway. She had heard many stories about Frank Gallagher, but none had ever mentioned him apologizing to anyone. "May I come in?" he asked, and against every rational thought, Samantha found herself stepping aside to let him enter. The restaurant felt different after hours, intimate and quiet, the empty chairs and dimmed lights creating an atmosphere of strange vulnerability. Frank moved with casual confidence as he took a seat at the bar, watching as Samantha returned to her closing duties. "Most people are too afraid to look me in the eye," he observed. "Yet you not only looked, But you challenged me. Why? Samantha considered her answer carefully as she folded napkins for the next day's service. My grandmother always taught me that respect is earned, not given, she finally replied. Even to men like you. Something flickered across Frank's face. Surprise, perhaps even admiration. Men like me, he repeated, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. And what kind of man do you think I am, Samantha? The question hung between them, dangerous and weighted with possibilities. The kind who isn't used to hearing no, she answered, meeting his gaze directly. The kind who has people trembling before they even know why they're afraid. Frank leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. And you? Are you afraid of me? The question was asked softly, almost intimately, as though her answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. I'd be stupid not to be, Samantha replied honestly, her hand stilling on the napkin she was folding. But I'm more afraid of living a life where I cower before men who think their power gives them the right to mistreat others. A genuine smile transformed Frank's face, making him look younger, almost approachable. Brave and honest, he murmured, seemingly to himself. A rare combination in my world. Frank left her his business card before departing, the heavy stock paper bearing only his name and a phone number. If you ever need anything, he said simply, the offer hanging between them like an unfinished sentence. That night, Samantha lay awake staring at her ceiling, the business card on her nightstand feeling like a loaded gun. She knew she should throw it away, cut all ties with a man whose very presence in her life could be dangerous. Instead, her fingers traced the embossed letters of his name, wondering what it said about her that she was already looking forward to seeing him again. A week passed before Samantha ran into Frank again, this time at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment. He sat alone by the window, reading a newspaper, looking surprisingly normal in jeans and a casual sweater, rather than his usual tailored suit. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, Samantha considered pretending she hadn't seen him. Instead, she found herself walking toward his table, drawn by a curiosity she couldn't quite explain. Mind if I join you? She asked, clutching her coffee cup like a shield. Frank folded his newspaper and gestured to the empty chair across from him, his eyes warming with something that might have been pleasure. The conversation started awkwardly, but soon flowed with surprising ease. Frank asked about her studies. Nursing, she told him, and listened with genuine interest as she described her grandmother's struggle with Parkinson's disease and her own determination to help others facing similar challenges. You seem to have your life figured out, Frank observed, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. A clear purpose, a direction. Not many people have that kind of certainty. Samantha tilted her head, studying him. And you? Did you always know you would become... She trailed off, unsure how to politely reference his criminal empire in the middle of a coffee shop on a sunny Tuesday morning. Frank's laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that transformed his face. No one dreams of becoming what I am when they're a child, he admitted, his voice dropping lower. Life happens, choices are made, and one day you wake up and realize you've built something you can't walk away from. The honesty in his voice touched something in Samantha, making her see beyond the fearsome reputation to the complicated man beneath. Is that what you want now? To walk away? Frank's eyes darkened as he leaned forward. Let's just say I've been questioning certain aspects of my life lately, he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. Meeting someone who isn't afraid to speak the truth can be illuminating. They parted with a promise to meet again, this time deliberately, at a small Italian restaurant far from Frank's usual haunts. As Samantha walked away, she felt herself standing at a crossroads, aware that every step toward Frank Gallagher was a step into dangerous territory. That evening, Samantha's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Thank you for the conversation today. It's been a long time since someone spoke to me as a person, not a position. She read the message 3 times before saving the number under his name. Her grandmother would call this playing with fire, Samantha thought as she typed a response. The problem was, she had always been fascinated by the dance of flames, the way they could both warm and destroy, their unpredictable beauty drawing you closer, even as instinct warned you to keep your distance. In the shadows across the street from Samantha's apartment, a car idled with 2 men inside, watching her windows. Boss wants us to keep an eye on her, the driver explained to his partner. Says she's off limits to everyone, including our own crew. Must be someone special. 2 worlds were indeed colliding. The ordinary life of a hardworking waitress and nursing student, and the shadowy empire built on power and fear. What neither Frank nor Samantha realized was just how explosive that collision would ultimately prove to be. 2 weeks after their coffee shop encounter, Frank and Samantha had fallen into a cautious rhythm of clandestine meetings and late-night phone calls. He would pick her up after her shifts in his sleek black car, windows tinted against curious eyes, and take her to hidden gems across the city. Tonight, they sat on the rooftop of an abandoned building overlooking the harbor, the city lights reflecting on the dark water below. Frank had brought a picnic basket filled with expensive wine and delicacies from his favorite restaurant, laid out on a blanket like normal people on a normal date. "The Petrov family is moving in on the waterfront," Frank said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "They think I've gone soft because I haven't retaliated for their last incursion." Samantha stiffened beside him, the reality of who he was crashing back like a cold wave. These peaceful moments between them were just that. Moments. Brief escapes from the violent world he inhabited and controlled. "Is that what I am? A sign of weakness?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the distant sound of boats in the harbor. Her question hung between them, honest and piercing. Frank turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "No," he said firmly, taking her hand in his. "You're the first thing in my life that feels like strength, not power. There's a difference." The distinction resonated with Samantha, touching something deep within her that she hadn't been able to articulate. She had always been drawn to healing, to fixing broken things, but Frank Gallagher wasn't a patient she could simply nurse back to health. "My lieutenant thinks I'm distracted," Frank continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "He says I'm putting everything at risk by spending time with you, that the Petrovs are watching and waiting for any sign of vulnerability." Samantha pulled her hand away, the weight of his world suddenly too heavy on her shoulders. "Then perhaps we should stop this," she suggested, though the thought sent an unexpected pain through her chest. Frank's expression hardened as he looked out over his city, because it was his city, built through blood and fear and loyalty bought at terrible prices. "I've spent 20 years building an empire I never questioned until I met you," he admitted. The next morning, Samantha arrived at work to find an elegant gift box on the employee shelf with her name on it. Inside was a delicate silver pendant shaped like a lion, Frank's family symbol, she realized, with a note that simply read, "Protection." That same afternoon, Frank sat in his office reviewing security footage when his right-hand man, Joey, entered without knocking. "Petrov's son was seen watching the girl's apartment last night," Joey reported, his face grim. "They're making a statement." Frank's fingers tightened around the glass in his hand until it shattered, blood mixing with whiskey as it dripped onto expensive leather. "Put our best men on her," he ordered, his voice deadly calm. "If they touch a hair on her head, I want the entire Petrov family erased." Joey hesitated at the door, concern evident in his furrowed brow. "The men are talking, boss. They say you're risking everything for this woman. Everything we've built, everything we've sacrificed for." Frank rose from his chair, the movement slow and deliberate, like a predator preparing to strike. "Then remind them who I am," he said softly, the quietness of his voice more terrifying than any shout. "Remind them what happens to people who question me." Samantha noticed the men immediately, 2 unfamiliar figures lingering near her apartment building, another following discreetly as she walked to class. Frank's protection, she realized, both comforted and troubled by their presence. When she confronted Frank about it during their dinner at a secluded restaurant on the outskirts of town, his expression darkened. "There are people who would hurt you to get to me," he explained, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "I never asked to be part of a war," Samantha replied, pushing her barely touched pasta away. She searched his face, looking for the man she'd glimpsed in quiet moments, the one who laughed at her terrible jokes and listened when she talked about her dreams. Frank reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching hers. "I know," he acknowledged, surprising her with his gentleness, "and I never expected to care about anyone enough to fear losing them." The admission hung between them, neither fully willing to name what was growing between them. Samantha had spent weeks telling herself this was just curiosity, just the thrill of danger, just a temporary detour in her carefully planned life. "Tell me about your childhood," she said suddenly, changing the subject to safer ground. Not Frank Gallagher the crime boss, but Frank the boy. "Who were you before all this?" His expression shifted, memories clearly surfacing that he rarely allowed himself to revisit. "I grew up in the South Side projects," he began, his voice taking on a different cadence. "My father worked the docks when he wasn't drunk. My mother cleaned houses for the wealthy across town." Samantha listened as he described a childhood of poverty and violence, of protecting his younger siblings from their father's rages, of learning early that power was the only true protection in a world that didn't care if you lived or died. "I was 16 the first time I hurt someone badly enough to put them in the hospital," Frank continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "He was threatening my sister. I didn't plan it, didn't think, just acted." The restaurant around them seemed to fade away as Samantha saw clearly the path that had led him from that desperate teenager to the man before her. "And afterward?" she asked softly, knowing the answer but needing to hear him say it. Frank's eyes met hers, unflinching in their honesty. "Afterward, I realized I was good at violence, that people feared me, that fear could be more valuable than money in the world I inhabited." Later that night, as they walked along the empty beach, waves crashing against the shore in rhythmic pulses, Samantha made a decision that went against every rational thought. She stopped walking, turned to face him, and kissed him first, claiming the moment as her choice, her desire. Frank responded with unexpected tenderness, his hands cradling her face as though she were made of something precious and fragile. When they finally broke apart, the look in his eyes made her heart stutter in her chest. "I'm falling in love with you," he whispered against her hair as they stood embracing under the stars, "and it terrifies me more than anything I've faced in my life." Samantha closed her eyes, absorbing the truth of his words, and the matching feeling growing in her own heart. "I know," she replied simply, because what else could she say? They were falling in love across an impossible divide, each step bringing them closer to a reckoning neither could avoid. 6 weeks into their relationship, Samantha was finishing her shift when she noticed an unfamiliar black car idling across from the restaurant. The hair on the back of her neck stood up as she realized the men inside weren't Frank's people, their postures too rigid, eyes too cold as they watched her. She quickly texted Frank, her fingers shaking slightly. "Strange car watching the restaurant. Not your men." His response was immediate. "Stay inside. I'm sending Joey. Don't leave alone." Within 15 minutes, Joey arrived with 3 other men, their presence causing the strange vehicle to pull away from the curb and disappear into traffic. "Boss wants you at his place tonight," Joey informed her, his expression giving nothing away. Frank was waiting at the door of his penthouse when they arrived, his face a mask of controlled fury. As soon as she was safely inside, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, his heart hammering against her cheek. "The Petrovs sent a clear message today," he explained after releasing her, pouring himself a generous whiskey. "They want me to know they can get to you anytime they choose." Joey paced the perimeter of the penthouse, phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated additional security measures with Frank's most trusted men. His loyalty to the boss had never wavered in 15 years, but he'd never seen Frank like this. Vulnerable, distracted, his legendary focus fractured by concern for this woman. "The Petrovs aren't just challenging your territory," Joey explained later, spreading surveillance photos across Frank's desk. "They're testing your resolve, seeing if the rumors about your distraction are true." The word hung in the air, loaded with implications about Frank's changing priorities. Frank studied each photograph with cold precision, recognizing Viktor Petrov's signature in the escalating provocations. Unlike Frank's calculated strategy, Viktor operated on emotion and spectacle, believing fear was most effective when it was unpredictable and theatrical. "They won't stop at threats," Frank acknowledged, remembering Viktor's reputation for mutilating enemies' loved ones as messages. "They want me to choose between appearing weak by protecting you or heartless by sacrificing you." In the kitchen, Samantha prepared coffee with trembling hands, overhearing fragments of their conversation that painted a horrifying picture of what might be coming. She had known Frank was dangerous, but only now did she truly comprehend the violent world she had stumbled into with those 4 words in the restaurant. Samantha sank onto his leather couch, the reality of her situation suddenly overwhelming. "This isn't just going to go away, is it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "As long as I'm with you, I'm a target." Frank knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I can protect you," he promised with an intensity that should have reassured her. "I can keep you safe, but I need you to trust me completely." The next morning, Samantha woke to an empty bed and the sound of raised voices from Frank's study. She crept closer to the door, her blood freezing as she overheard Joey's urgent report about a massacre at one of the Petrovs' clubs the previous night. 15 dead, boss, including Petrov's youngest son, Joey was saying, his voice tight with tension. "They're saying it was our crew, but I swear I gave no such order." Someone's trying to force all-out war. Frank's response was measured, calculating. Find out who gave the order. Bring them to me, alive, and double the security on Samantha. This changes everything. When he emerged from his study, Frank's expression was carefully neutral, but Samantha had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the subtle tightening around his eyes. Something's happened, she stated. Not a question, but a certainty. Frank hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell her. There was an incident last night, he finally admitted. Someone attacked a Petrov establishment, and now they think it was my order. Fear gripped Samantha's heart, not just for herself but for Frank. Was it? She asked directly, needing to know what kind of man she had fallen in love with. Was he still capable of ordering such violence? No, Frank answered, holding her gaze steadily. Which means someone in my organization is acting without permission, trying to trigger a war. And in our world, betrayal has only one consequence. That evening, as Frank made calls from his secure line in the study, Samantha received a text from an unknown number. He can't protect you forever. Smart girls know when to walk away. Her hands trembled as she showed the message to Frank. His face drained of color as he read the text, immediately barking orders into his phone for his security team to trace the number. You're not leaving my sight, he told Samantha, his voice leaving no room for argument. 2 days later, trapped in Frank's penthouse with armed guards at every entrance, Samantha felt her carefully constructed life slipping away. Her classes, her job, her grandmother. Everything was on hold while invisible enemies circled closer. The breaking point came when Frank returned in the middle of the night. Blood spattered across his white shirt. He didn't need to explain. She could read the grim satisfaction in his eyes, knew he had found and dealt with the traitor in his ranks. This is who I am, Frank said quietly, watching her face as the realization settled over her. I've tried to keep this part of me away from you, but I can't separate myself into pieces. This is the reality of my world, Samantha. Samantha stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of Frank's penthouse, watching the city lights flicker below like stars caught in an urban web. 3 weeks had passed since she'd seen the blood on his shirt. 3 weeks of being a gilded prisoner in his fortress, while war raged in the streets below. My grandmother called again today, she said without turning as Frank entered the room. She doesn't understand why I can't visit her, why I've missed so many classes. I'm running out of excuses. Frank approached cautiously, maintaining the careful distance that had grown between them since that night. The Petrovs have gone quiet, he offered, like a peace treaty. Too quiet. They're planning something big. Samantha finally turned to face him, her expression resolute. I can't live like this anymore, Frank. This isn't a life. It's a cage, no matter how expensive the bars. Something shifted in Frank's eyes, a realization dawning that he had perhaps been avoiding for weeks. What are you saying? He asked, though the tension in his jaw suggested he already knew her answer. I'm saying I need to go home, back to my apartment, my job, my studies, Samantha replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I need my life back, a normal life without constantly looking over my shoulder. Frank's hands clenched at his sides, the battle between love and control playing out across his features. They'll kill you to hurt me, he said flatly, the brutal truth of their situation laid bare between them. Samantha stepped closer, placing her palm against his cheek, feeling the stubble rough beneath her fingers. Then what's the alternative? I stay locked in this tower forever? You continue killing to protect me until there's no one left to fear? The question hung between them, impossible to answer, yet demanding resolution. Frank covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss against her palm. There is another way, he said finally, his voice so low she had to lean closer to hear him. But it would mean giving up everything I've built, everything I am. Samantha's heart stuttered in her chest, hope and disbelief warring within her. What are you saying, Frank? He moved away, pacing the length of the window before turning back to her with newfound determination. I could walk away, transfer control to Joey, liquidate my holdings, disappear, start over somewhere new. The impossibility of such a transformation hung in the air between them, both knowing the underworld rarely allowed clean exits. They would hunt you down, Samantha whispered, the fear evident in her voice. Frank's smile was grim, but certain. Not if I make the right arrangements first. Not if I ensure the transition is profitable for everyone involved. There's always a price for freedom. I just need to be willing to pay it. Willing to pay. That night, as Samantha slept fitfully beside him, Frank made the first of many calls that would change the course of his life. By dawn, he had set in motion a plan that would either grant them both freedom or destroy everything he had built. "I need you to trust me one last time," Frank told Samantha over breakfast, sliding a passport across the table to her. "I've arranged for you to stay with my cousin in Vancouver while I finish things here. 3 weeks, a month at most." Samantha's fingers traced the unfamiliar name on the passport. Claire Bennett, the weight of this new identity like a stone in her stomach. The photograph looked like her, but the eyes stared back with a stranger's gaze, someone without a past or connections. "What about my grandmother?" she asked, the realization hitting her that disappearing meant abandoning the woman who had raised her. The nursing home bills, the weekly visits that brightened the old woman's increasingly confused days, all of it would end abruptly. Frank had anticipated this concern, sliding another document across the table. Transfer papers for her grandmother to a private care facility in Vancouver, all expenses covered through an anonymous trust. "She'll join you once you're settled," he promised. The preparations were meticulous, revealing how long Frank must have been considering this option. Financial arrangements, secure communications channels, contingency plans layered upon contingency plans. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a chess game planned many moves ahead. Joey entered without knocking, his expression grim as he whispered something in Frank's ear that made the blood drain from his face. "We need to move up the timeline," Frank announced, all traces of tenderness vanishing beneath the mask of the strategist. "You're leaving tonight." The small cabin on the outskirts of Vancouver was nothing like Frank's luxurious penthouse, its rustic simplicity a stark contrast to the opulence she had grown accustomed to. Samantha found unexpected peace in the isolation, in the rhythm of days measured by sunrise and sunset rather than danger and fear. Frank's cousin, a quiet man named David, who had left the family business decades ago to become a carpenter, asked few questions and offered simple wisdom. Frank was always different, he told her one evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the mountains fade into darkness. "Different how?" Samantha asked, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea, hungry for any insight into the man she had fallen in love with, despite every rational thought. David considered the question, his weathered face thoughtful in the fading light. He felt things more deeply, the injustice, the poverty, the helplessness. Where others saw opportunity in crime, Frank saw protection, power to change things. The weeks stretched into a month with only sporadic, carefully worded messages from Frank. "Progress being made. Stay safe. I miss you." Each one a lifeline Samantha clung to as doubts crept in during the long, quiet nights. Then came the news reports. A massive federal raid on organized crime in Boston. Dozens arrested, including several high-ranking members of the Gallagher organization. Samantha watched in horror as Joey's face appeared on screen, being led away in handcuffs. No mention of Frank Gallagher, no images of his arrest, no confirmation of his fate. The uncertainty was a physical ache, as Samantha waited by the phone that remained stubbornly silent, fearing the worst with each passing hour. On the 36th day of her exile, a nondescript car with rental plates pulled into the cabin's driveway. Samantha watched from the window, heart pounding, as a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses emerged slowly from the driver's seat. She recognized his walk before she could see his face, the confident stride now tempered with caution, shoulders set with new wariness. Frank looked thinner, his face more angular under several weeks' growth of beard, but his eyes when he removed the sunglasses were the same. "It's done," he said simply when she opened the door, standing on the threshold as though uncertain of his welcome. "Joey took a deal to testify against the Petrovs. The feds got what they wanted, and I got my exit." Samantha stepped forward into his embrace, breathing in the unfamiliar scent of drugstore soap instead of his expensive cologne. "And your empire?" she asked against his chest, needing to understand the sacrifice. Frank's laugh held no bitterness, only relief. "Dismantled, divided, destroyed. I kept enough to start over, legitimate investments, offshore accounts the feds couldn't touch. Not rich, but comfortable." That night, lying beside him in the narrow bed, Samantha traced the new scar that ran along his ribs, evidence of dangers he hadn't shared in his sparse communications. "Was it worth it?" she whispered into the darkness. Frank gathered her closer, his heartbeat steady under her ear. "I spent 20 years building something I thought would make me powerful," he murmured. "Then you showed me in 4 words that true power isn't controlling people through fear. It's having the courage to walk away from everything for something that matters more." 2 days later, they crossed the border into Montana with new identities. Mark and Claire Bennett, a couple looking to start a small business in a quiet corner of America. their past scrubbed clean through channels that cost Frank the last of his underworld connections. The motel they stayed in that first night was unremarkable, the kind of place that accepted cash without questions, where guests avoided eye contact in the cramped breakfast area. Frank swept the room for surveillance devices out of habit, the methodical search a ritual he couldn't yet abandon. Samantha watched him from the bed, struck by how ordinary he looked in faded jeans and a flannel shirt bought at a roadside store. The transformation wasn't just in his appearance, but in how he carried himself. The intimidating presence deliberately diminished, shoulders slightly rounded, gaze less direct. They traveled eastward first, a misdirection in case anyone was tracking their movements, before doubling back through small towns with forgettable names. Frank's paranoia dictated they switch vehicles 3 times, each car more modest than the last, erasing the final traces of the man who once rode in chauffeur-driven luxury. In a diner outside Billings, Frank tensed when a state trooper entered, his hand instinctively moving toward a weapon he no longer carried. Samantha covered his hand with hers, squeezing gently until the rigid set of his shoulders relaxed, the moment of panic passing unnoticed by other customers. The town they eventually chose was selected from a short list of 5 possibilities, each vetted through Frank's dwindling network of contacts. Small enough to offer anonymity, economically stable enough to support a new business, and, most importantly, outside the spheres of influence of anyone who might recognize Boston's most feared crime boss. The town they chose was small enough to be overlooked, large enough to disappear in. They purchased a struggling bookstore with an apartment above, the simple space becoming home as they filled it with carefully chosen treasures rather than expensive showpieces. 3 years passed in the quiet rhythm of their new existence, the bookstore slowly transforming into a community hub under Samantha's careful guidance. They added a coffee corner, hosted reading groups, became fixtures in a town that accepted them without question. Frank, now firmly established as Mark, discovered unexpected satisfaction in the ordinary. He maintained the building, ordered inventory, kept the books with the same meticulous attention he had once given to territory disputes and protection payments. Mrs. Reynolds asked again about your secret past today, Samantha teased one evening as they closed up shop. She's convinced you were either CIA or a famous author writing under a pseudonym. If only she knew. Frank smiled as he locked the register, the gesture now coming naturally after years of practiced normalcy. What did you tell her this time? He asked, slipping his arm around Samantha's waist as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. That you're a man who loves his privacy almost as much as you love your wife, she replied, the gold band on her finger catching the light as she unlocked their door. The simple ceremony at the local courthouse a year ago had been nothing like the lavish wedding a mob boss might have had, but perfect in its quiet sincerity. Some nights, Samantha still woke to find Frank standing at the window, scanning the street with old habits that died hard. But those nights grew fewer as seasons passed, as the man who had once controlled Boston's underworld found peace in Wednesday night community board meetings and Sunday morning pancake breakfasts. They never spoke of Boston anymore, though they both monitored the news. The Petrov organization had eventually fallen to a rival family, while what remained of the Gallagher crew had scattered to the winds, most ending up in prison or witness protection. Occasionally, Frank would catch himself reaching for a weapon that was no longer there when a car backfired or a stranger lingered too long outside their store. Samantha would quietly take his hand in those moments, anchoring him to their present reality. The bookstore thrived in its modest way, becoming known for its carefully curated selection and the owner's uncanny ability to recommend exactly the right book for each customer. You always could read people, Samantha observed after watching Frank spend an hour helping a troubled teenager find something that sparked his interest. Frank shrugged, uncomfortable with praise he still wasn't accustomed to receiving. I just pay attention, he replied, though they both knew his insight came from years of assessing threats and opportunities, skills now redirected toward gentler purposes. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes walk to the small park at the edge of town, hands intertwined as they watched the sunset paint the sky in colors. No penthouse view could ever match. Neither needed to speak of how far they had come, the distance measured not in miles, but in the peace that now resided in their hearts. The bookstore became known for hosting local authors, a community service that brought modest profit, but immense goodwill. Frank, as Mark, surprised himself with genuine interest in their stories, finding parallels between creative struggle and his own reinvention. Samantha finally completed her nursing degree online, the certificate arriving without ceremony one Tuesday afternoon. That evening, Frank presented her with a small silver pin shaped like a Florence Nightingale lamp, a quiet acknowledgement of the dream she had never abandoned. Their apartment gradually filled with photographs, not of their past, but of this new life, camping trips to nearby mountains, community fundraisers, holiday gatherings with neighbors who had become friends, each image a testament to possibilities neither had imagined 3 years earlier. Once, a customer from Boston browsed their military history section, his Boston accent triggering a moment of paralyzing fear in Frank. The man chatted casually about his hometown, never noticing how the shopkeeper's responses grew measured, how his hand gripped the counter edge until knuckles whitened. After the Boston visitor left, Samantha found Frank in the storeroom, breathing deeply to calm the racing of his heart. "It gets easier," she promised, wrapping her arms around him from behind. One day at a time, one breath at a time. And she was right. Each such encounter became less terrifying, the ghost of Frank Gallagher fading a little more with each test passed. The local sheriff became a regular, stopping by each morning for coffee and conversation, completely unaware that the mild-mannered bookseller had once commanded men who would kill at his word. Frank found unexpected irony in their friendship, in the way the officer would share small-town police stories with someone who had orchestrated crimes that would have shocked him to his core. "Do you ever regret it?" Samantha asked one night, as they sat on their small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine that cost a fraction of what Frank once spent without thought. "The power, the money, the respect. Do you miss any of it?" Frank considered the question seriously, as he did all her questions, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I thought I would," he admitted. "I expected to feel the loss like a phantom limb, but what I found instead was space for something better to grow." The door to their apartment opened to reveal David, visiting from Vancouver for the week, carrying dessert from the local bakery. "Still can't believe my cousin became a respectable businessman," he teased, setting the box on the table. "All because a waitress had the courage to say 4 words to the most dangerous man in Boston," Frank replied, his eyes finding Samantha's across the room, the love in them unchanged by the passage of years. The bookstore celebrated its 3rd anniversary with a small community gathering. Locals who had become friends, raising glasses to the quiet couple who had transformed a failing business into a beloved institution. No one there could have imagined the man serving cake had once made rivals tremble with a single look. As the last guest departed, Samantha found Frank standing in the center of their shop, taking in the space they had created together. "What are you thinking?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "I'm thinking about how one moment can change everything," he replied, pulling her close. 4 words in a restaurant, and suddenly the path I'd been on for 20 years didn't make sense anymore. Samantha smiled, remembering the frightened waitress she had been, the unlikely courage that had risen within her that night. "Not yours to spill," she whispered, the words that had altered both their destinies forever. Thank you all for following this story. If you're enjoying it, write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, because your support is important for me to continue here.